What's up guys, Fleetwood here. Today I'm going to bring you my first gear review video. The gear I'm going to review today is the St. Croix BassX rod. The one I have in my hand is a 7'4" heavy action or heavy power fast action. So first thing I want to get into is how do we understand what power means and what action means. Power is going to be simply how much force is required to load the rod, to bend the rod. So the heavier the power, the harder you're going to have to set the hook, the harder it is to get the rod to bow, to get it to load up. The action is how far into the blank the rod will bow, how far to load up. So an extra fast, if you guys can see the tip, an extra fast is going to be very much, the tip section loads up, and 75 to 80% of the rod is going to be all backbone. It's going to be all power. Fast, it's going to come down a little bit farther. Tip's going to be a little bit more play, a little bit more bow, and then backbone. Moderate fast comes down a little bit farther. Moderate rods are usually going to be glass, fiberglass, primarily for crankbaits, or they're going to be some of the cheaper alternatives that you can get from Walmart, places like that, where you can get a rod for 30 bucks, 40 bucks, usually Shakespeare's. If you guys remember the old, at least the commercials, the Unbreakable, guys holding a 20-pound weight and the rod's bowed all the way over from the handle all the way to the tip. That's an extremely moderate rod. St. Croix does something very interesting or very unique. They make their rods slightly slower than what you would say maybe is the industry standard. What I mean by that is their fast loads up a little bit more than most other companies' fast actions. It can be very good. Some cases it can be a detriment, but for the most part it creates a much more versatile rod. So getting into the title, is the BassX the best rod you can get for $100? To answer that quite simply is too subjective. It's too subjective for me to say this is the best, or a Dobbins Fury is the best, or Shimano SLX is the best. It's very subjective. I can't answer that for you. Anybody needs to go check out their own, get a feel for what they like. However, I will say that the BassX, in my opinion, is the most versatile rod you can get for $100. And I'll get into some explanation on that. So first and foremost, being an East Coast guy, fishing primarily the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, the Northern Bay, from the Gunpowder River to the Susquehanna River, the Susquehanna Flats, even occasionally going up into the Northeast River, and fishing some of the reservoirs around the area, Loch Raven, Liberty. This summer, some of the most grass I've ever seen in my life. Thick mats, thick grass. So this summer I primarily frog fished from July till September, maybe into early October. So I kind of lucked out because I bought this rod before I realized that was going to happen, and there was no way to plan that to be the case. But this is a 7'4" heavy action, or heavy power fast action. So I lined this up with 65-pound braid, threw a frog most of the summer, and this thing handled it beautifully. Great backbone, great hook sets. I can't say I'm not impressed with how this rod handled frog fishing. Normally you hear a lot of guys talk about throwing extra heavy for frog fishing, just because fishing a frog, you have the two hooks. When you sit them, they kind of turn and fight against each other. You have to really jack a fish to get a good hook set on a frog fish. That's why most people throw the heaviest stuff they can get away with. This heavy handled it just fine. Going to the opposite end of the spectrum, this heavy also handles a 3/8 ounce chatterbait, a 3/8 ounce spinnerbait, 3/8 ounce jig, um, Texas rig. You know, it's still fast enough to get hook sets on those things, but moderate enough to where I was comfortable throwing a spook or a whopper plopper, something with treble hooks where you can potentially straighten the hooks or pull them out if you force fish too hard on a heavy rod. Most of the time with treble hook baits, people go a little bit more moderate. Because St. Croix's entire lineup is a little bit more moderate than, again, I want to go back to this, the standard or the industry standard. It allows for more versatility. The only thing I had to change, I would go from straight 65-pound braid to tying on a leader, 6 to 8 feet of mono, and then throwing a spook instead of a frog. A little bit later in the season, going into the fall, once the grass started to die back, and I had other options. Again, going from frogging to spinnerbait bite in the fall to top water bite. This was literally able to do it all well enough. It's not going to be optimal for everything. There is no rod that's optimal for every application. But if you're a person who wants a couple rods that can do almost anything at the power that you need it at, the BassX is going to be a great option. I mentioned before, this is a 7'4" heavy power fast action. One of the other ones in this lineup that caught my attention is the 6'9" medium power extra fast. I want to get my hands on that rod because I believe it'd be a great jerkbait rod. Because again, the extra fast in St. Croix is likely to be more of a normal fast. 6'9" medium power, great length, great power for jerkbait fishing. Jerkbait fishing is a bit of an anomaly, a bit of its own little thing because you've got small light wire treble hooks, but you also have to have enough tip to be able to really crack and jerk that bait to get the movement you want out of it. A whippy, moderate rod is going to flex and bow as you're whipping it. Doesn't give you that hard darting side to side action on a jerkbait that you need. It kind of becomes a lazy movement and doesn't trigger the bites. So a good jerkbait rod is hard to find specifically unless you go into some of the higher ends that have application specific rods. Pretty sure Mega Bass and G Loomis have jerkbait specific rods. I'm sure there's some other brands as well, but those are the ones off the top of my head. So my last point, at the $100 price point, I really feel like there's three competitors. You've got, again, St. Croix with the BassX, you've got Shimano with the SLX, and you've got Dobbins with the Fury line. All three are great, but if you need a lot of versatility, BassX is the way to go. Thank you guys. See you around.